Ni hao. Hey. Hello? Hello, is that Ian Lindquist?
Ni hao. Yes, Miss Chan. This is Ayan. We are in sync.
Thank you so much for finding time. I know you must be very busy with the centenary
It's a
launch
pleasure.
and
We really admire your work on mid-20th century image ecologies, especially your research on archival practice.
well, I'm flattered. For many Asian non-market institutions, your pioneering work with long-term equity contract has been inspirational too.
So, let's begin.
Okay, just to refresh, for the centenary, I'd like to archive your live thread recall of Moderna.
Yep, that's fine. I've enabled about 20 minutes.
Okay, live. Maybe we could start with some personal history. What were you doing before you became executive at Moderna Muset 3?
Well, I joined Moderna 2 in 2049, almost 10 years ago. First as advisor to the development working group, then as part of the governance team. I participated in the forking of Moderna 3 in 251 and was elected fixed-term executive in 252, until today. I've got another 4 years in the project.
And before that?
Immediately before joining Moderna, I collaborated in the exhibition program at the Makba cluster in Mumbai for 6 years, although more in resource provision. That's where we worked on a version of that equity bond issue you mentioned.
And before that?
In programming, again at Tate in Doha for 4 years, particularly developing exhibitionary platforms. And even before that, I participated in research on cultural governance for the Nordic Congress of the European Multitude for 6 years. I suspect exhibition agency and governance are my real strengths.
Maybe we should dive into the deep end. Could you briefly say something of why Moderna 3 devolved and why was it necessary?
As you can imagine, there was a lot of consultation beforehand. It's not something we did without due diligence. Now, for almost 40 years, Moderna version 2 has explored and developed the exhibitionary form. And we pioneered the production of many collaborative exhibitions, resources, and assemblages. We helped build robust public, what you prefer to term non-market cultural networks, and scaled those networks to produce our iCommons, part of the vast global public domain. And we have continually nurtured and developed emergent art practice. And Moderna can proudly and quite rightly say that we participated in shaping the early 21st century movement of art, from an exhibitionary practice based around art artifacts, spectacle, and consumption, to that of embedded co-production.
Do you mean that...
Of course, there were many complex factors involved, but we were agent in the shift from a heritage cultural mindset of broadcast to that of emergent peer-to-peer meshworks. Following the logic of practice, we became an imminent institution. Although, having said all that, we've not really answered your question, have we? Given that Moderna 2 continues its exhibitionary research, some of us believe that exhibition as a technology and immanence as an institutional logic needed to be subject to radical revision. So this is what we intend to explore with Moderna 3. We want to execute some of the research, to enact, to be more agent than immanent.
Okay, I was wondering, could you say a...
Sorry to overwrite, but in a way the forking follows something of the tradition of the Moderna Musette. And Moderna 2 mutated through 1 because the tension between trying to collect, conserve, and exhibit the history of 20th century art, and at the same time trying to be a responsible 21st century art institution proved too difficult to reconcile. Moderna 1 continues its mandate. Its buildings and collection has global heritage status. In turn, the early hybridization enabled Moderna 2 to be more mobile and experimental in its organizational form, in its devolved administration, and its exhibition-making practice.
Could you just expand on the more complex factors you mentioned earlier?
That's a big question. Let me rerun a general thread from Composite. Well, a good place to start might be the bifurcation of the market for contemporary art from emergent art practices themselves. Although the public domain has a long genealogy, way back into ancient European land rights, commons projects, and Commonwealth, it was the advent of digitalization and particularly very early composite language projects in the 1980s, which, and this appears astonishing to us now, were proprietary, that kick-started what were called open, free, or non-market resource initiatives. Of course, these languages, assemblages, and the resources they were building needed legal protection, licenses to keep them out of property and competitive marketization. The General Public License, the legendary GPL Legal Code, was written in 1989.
It's not so old.
So then text and images, either still or moving, artifacts, systems and processes, music and sound, either as source or assembled, all embedded plant, animal and bodily knowledge, public research and all possible ecologies of these resources began to be aggregated by the viral licenses into our public domain. Landmarks include the releasing of the sequenced human genome in 2001, the foundation of the Multitude Social Enterprise Coalition in 2009, intellectual property reform in the teens, the UN Multitude-initiated microtaxation of global financial transactions in 2013, which redirected so many financial resources to public domain cultural initiatives, and, well, I could go on and on and on. But anyway, most participants will be over-familiar with this thread.
Remind me, when did Moderna affiliate?
In archive records suggest öppna dagar or hörifrön till Almaningen with Mejan in... I'm sorry. We did some collaborative open knowledge projects with Mejan in Stockholm in late 2009. And when Moderna 2 launched in 2012, we declared all new knowledge General Public License version 6 compliant.
Wasn't that initiated by Chus Martinez, one of your predecessors? She seems to have shaped early Moderna 2, which in turn became an inspiration globally.
It's nice you say so. Since 2012, we collaborated with the fledgling Nordic Congress in what was to become the European Multitude to form the backbone of the public domain cultural meshwork. It eventually convened in late 2022, so we were at source.
Okay, thank you.
Now, simultaneous with the exponential growth of the public domain was the market for what we still call contemporary art. Now, many historians locate one of the sources for the contemporary art market as the auction in 1973 of the art artifact collection of Robert and Ethel Scull, an extraordinary collection of paintings by pop male artists like Andy Warhol, Klaus Oldenburg, Ed Ruscha, and, I recall Jasper Johns.
From Composite, I'm streaming this John shot analog film of the sale from New York MoMA's public domain archive.
It's a great film, and many of the art artifacts have subsequently devolved to Moderna.
I have the catalog. It's present. I'm browsing.
Well, that auction set record prices for many artists. It also connected art artifacts with financial speculation in a way previously unimagined. Now, by 1981, one of the big 2 auction houses, Sotheby's, was active in 23 countries and had a contemporary art market throughput of 4.9 billion old US dollars. Now, soon, global trade fairs mushroomed. Commercial galleries flourished, and a sliver of branded artists lived like mid-20th century media oligarchs. By 2006, complex financial trading technologies were using art artifacts as an asset class, and most public modern art museums were priced out of the contemporary art market. Now, in retrospect, we wasted an enormous amount of time and effort convening financial resources to purchase and publicly own vastly overpriced goods, and we wasted time wooing wealthy speculators for sporadic gifts and donations too.
That connects. It was the same locally. The conflictual ethical demands in early modern art museums were systemic and obviously unsustainable. Reversing the resource flow and using transaction tax to nourish public domain cultural meshwork seems, well, inevitable.
Well, sometimes rethreading is such a wonderful luxury. Anyway, auction houses began to buy commercial galleries, and this dissolved the tradition of the primary, managed, and secondary, free art market. Now, as a consequence, by 2012, the contemporary art market was a true competitive market, with prices for assets falling as well as rising. Various contemporary art bond, derivative, and futures markets were quickly convened, and typically art assets